This is America at its best, and one of the best things in America is NOVA, the producers of amazing shows on science and our world. And they are going to lead this next panel, one of the producers there, and the topic is one that's probably as important as any that we face in this country today, and that is innovation. We'll then have a session later in the day on what we're calling systemic issues, our political process, legal system, and our future and China. And then we'll hear from 6 inspiring leaders, each making a difference and making our communities, our states, our country, and the world a better place for all of us. So now let's begin with session number 3, and will you join me in welcoming the panelists to our stage? Innovation, hosted by NOVA. Come on out, folks. Our moderator is Paula Apsell. She is the senior executive producer and director of WGBH's science unit. NOVA, as you probably know, has won every major broadcasting award, some of them many times over, including Emmys, the Peabody, the AAAS Science Journalism Award, as well as an Academy Award nomination for special effects. Paula will be our leader today, but I get the honors of introducing our panelists. Susan Hockfield is the 16th president of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Her title is President and Professor of Neuroscience. She is the first woman and the first life scientist to hold the title of President of MIT. You can applaud here. Norman Augustine is the retired Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of the Lockheed Martin Corporation and a former Undersecretary of the Army. He is one of the few individuals in this country, along with guys named Gates and Barrett and Grove and Jobs, who are repeatedly cited for their national leadership in technology. Currently serves as a member of the President's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology and the U.S. Department of Homeland Security's Advisory Council. He has won the Department of Defense's highest civilian award, the Distinguished Service Medal, 5 separate times. Insert applause here for Norm Augustine. Oh, and he has 28 honorary degrees. Oh, well. Shirley Ann Jackson is the 18th president of Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, a job she has held since July of 1999. She served prior to that as chairman of the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission. Dr. Jackson became president of the AAAS, the world's largest general scientific society, in 2004. Member of the National Academy of Engineering and a fellow of the American Academy of the Arts and Sciences, she holds 21 honorary degrees and was named one of the top 50 women in science by Discover magazine. Amir Abu Shair, born in 1972, is an American teacher and mechanical engineer. In 2001, during his first year of teaching, he established the Dos Pueblos Engineering Academy on the Dos Pueblos High School campus. In addition to being a director of the DPEA, he teaches physics, engineering, robotics, machining, and manufacturing. I believe he brought a toy along with him, too. How about that? We brought a toy. Props are always good. He was named a MacArthur Fellow in 2010. Please welcome Amir Abu Shair. So to tee up our conversation today, we're going to introduce some of the topics that will be covered here in the next 45 minutes to an hour by way of a video produced by NOVA. Take a look.
In 1957, the Soviet Union beat us into space by launching a satellite known as Sputnik. And that was a wake-up call that caused the United States to boost our investment in innovation, particularly in math and science. 50 years later, our generation's Sputnik moment is back. This is our moment.
Liftoff. Shuttle has arrived on board Atlantis.
Freedom Tower is going to be state-of-the-art for many, many years to come.
The biggest earthquakes are comparable to many, many thousands of nuclear bombs.
It changes the paradigm in which we work with computers. That's the vision.
It's not the genes you have, but how you use them that generates the great diversity of the animal kingdom.
This is the hardest job I've ever been on in my life.
They're a remarkable place and an opportunity to start a clean energy revolution.
Keep our fingers crossed. Let's hope. And pray. Okay. All right, we are into high electrification in the anvil now.
Still getting a few precipitation particles through the instrument.
Are we alone? I think it's the grandest of all scientific questions.
This will be the most exciting adventure we've ever undertaken on Mars.
Coming up on the tree. We are in powered flight. Sky crane has started.
Tango Delta nominal.
UTIP is good. Touchdown confirmed. We're safe on Mars.
Why don't we ever see events unfold in reverse order? According to the laws of physics, this can happen.
If time isn't what we all think it is, then what is it? Did it have a beginning? Will it have an end? Where did it come from?
Every bone that came out of the ground was something brand new to science. It was really amazing.
We see the launching of the career that led to Homo sapiens.
I became deeply interested in understanding who are you in this world? What is the nature of my experience?
We're the Starsky and Hutch of science nerds.
I don't think you have enough aluminum foil on this oven.
We are seeing actual atoms. Isn't this a historic technological achievement?
Venus is so hot, it'll cook a 16-inch pepperoni pizza out on the windowsill in 9 seconds. We still don't know the origin of life. We wonder if life was once on Mars.
Isn't the trouble with your job the not knowing?
That is not the trouble, that is the seduction.
The payoffs have been huge. I mean, we see something nobody's ever seen before.
And the planet Earth deserves to know about it.
Look at this!
Let's get moving.
Thank you very much, Tyler. I'm happy to be here today and honored to moderate this panel on innovation and the vital role that it plays in our economy. Let's take a look at this slide, which epitomizes for me the issue. And thanks very much to The Economist for this great cover. So for the next hour, you'll be hearing from 4 distinguished speakers who are not just big thinkers, but big doers. They've spent their lives attacking this issue from every major angle: scientific research, education, manufacturing, and public policy. Before I start, I'd like to say a few words about why this panel is necessary in the first place. As I tell the NOVA team when we're deciding what topics to tackle, the first question to ask is, why should we care? I would argue that what's at stake when we talk about innovation is nothing less than the definition of the American dream. A big part of that has always been the idea that each generation should build on the accomplishments of the previous one. For most of us, that means that children should do better than their parents. That was definitely true in my case. My parents didn't go to college, so the first day I walked into Brandeis University as a new freshman, I was already one step ahead. I've lived the American dream, as have most of us in this room, I would guess. But today, this unwritten social contract is in trouble. We've all heard the stories and statistics about young adults, even college graduates, unemployed or underemployed, moving back home with mom and dad. There's even a name for this phenomenon: failure to launch. When a phrase like that enters the national lexicon, it's not a good thing. I don't think anyone really knows whether this is a lingering after effect of the recession or a distressing symptom of the new normal. But whatever it is, we'd better do something about it. In a globalized, competitive world, we need to figure out how we can build an American economy vibrant enough to absorb the energy and talents of everyone. And that brings us back to innovation. If one word can come close to capturing the right approach to solving such a big and complex problem, it's that one. One of the best things about working at NOVA is that I get to meet scientists and engineers all the time and learn about the incredible work that they're doing. So I can tell you straight out, there's no shortage of game-changing ideas coming out of our laboratories. The trick is leveraging these ideas to grow our economy. Once they're translated into useful products, we need to make sure they're manufactured here, creating good jobs that act as economic multipliers. But for that to happen, we need our schools to prepare kids with the skills needed to compete in a 21st century workforce. And we need to foster science literacy in the public at large to make sure that we continue to invest in R&D that will keep the whole thing going for generations to come. As one of our panelists, Dr. Shirley Jackson, will explain, we need to create an innovation ecosystem that brings these strands together in powerful ways. So let's get started. I'd like to begin by posing the following question to each of our panelists. What is the greatest challenge facing our nation today in creating an innovation economy? Each of them will speak for 3 or 4 minutes, then we'll have a discussion among the panelists, and finally I've asked them to come up with a call to action. What steps must we take to achieve an innovation economy? Norm, as I walk back, let's start with you, please.
Okay, thank you. And let me begin by saying how honored I am to be on a panel with 3 people I admire as much as my colleagues here. And Paula, you mentioned 2 things, innovation and the economy. Certainly, the economy's importance can't be overstated. I'm an engineer, not an economist. To me, the economy means jobs. Without jobs, people's standard of living will not be what they would hope it would be. Without people having jobs, we won't have the money to pay for health care, Social Security, national security, and all the things that we count on. But if the economy is important, it's innovation that's going to have to underpin it for America. And I say that because we certainly aren't going to compete based on a lower cost of labor. We aren't going to be able to compete based on the quality of our infrastructure, which is now sunk to 16th in the world. We aren't going to be able to compete because we have a larger market. In fact, most of the market growth in the years ahead will not be in the United States. So if that's true, to your question, what are the challenges that we face in terms of having an innovation economy? And unfortunately, there are many. They go all the way from more esoteric things such as a growing aversion to taking risk to more tangible things. Such things as the fact that we now have the highest stated tax rate, corporate tax rate in the entire world. We have a legal system that has resulted in corporate America spending over twice as much on litigation as it spends on research. We have a system whereby much that other governments provide, not their corporations, our corporations and our innovators are asked to provide. General Motors says it spends more money on health care than it does on steel. Starbucks, more on health care than on coffee. So there's a long list of things that are impediments. But the number one impediment in my mind stands out above everything else, and that's the quality or lack thereof of our K through 12 education system. And certainly we have some great teachers and some great schools, but on average, we aren't even basically competitive on the global marketplace. And that is particularly true in math and science, and it's particularly true for children that come from less fortunate circumstances. Innovation really is the key to the quality of life and where America is headed. Innovation in our economy. And as Paula said, we're talking about the American dream here and whether or not we can preserve that dream. And the foundation of that, in my opinion, will be K through 12 education and improving that system.
Let me ask you one question before we move on to Shirley. I've heard many CEOs say that there are 3,000, 8,000, 1,500, 10,000 jobs going wanting in the United States that they can't fill because the quality of the workforce is not high enough. There's some people who think that they could fill them, they just don't want to pay enough for those workers. What's the truth here? Are there really jobs in this economy with so much unemployment going unfilled because we just can't find workers technically literate enough to take those jobs?
Paul, I believe that's true. Today there are 3 million people, there are 3 million jobs sitting empty that employers are trying to fill. There are 12 million unemployed. And the principal difference is that the people just don't have the background, the education, the abilities to fill those 3 million jobs. And on the path we're on, that's likely to get worse, not better.
Shirley, let's go to you now.
Well, if one wants to talk about, what is keeping us from having an innovation economy, I probably would not start there, but I'll come there. I think we have to think about the scene, the setting, and then think about structure. And the setting is driven, I think, by two key things. First, the global challenges that we face of energy, water, food, security, national security, the linkage of them with each other, and the linkage of them to questions of climate and resource allocation end up creating for us intersecting vulnerabilities that we see played out, and particularly as we think about weather recently. But we see them played out where if there's a triggering event, there can be cascading consequences. The second key element of the scene is that a global transformation as well is underway in how we make decisions, how we make products, how we make connections, how we teach and learn, and ultimately how we make progress. And that is because we are entering a data-driven, web-enabled, computer-powered, hyperlinked world. And it has great implications for how we educate our children, how we actually make things, how we run our government. And in order for us to really take advantage of that, will require true innovation rooted in scientific discovery and technological innovation. That means that we do need to think about structurally what comprises an innovation ecosystem. And if you think about it, there are 4 key elements. And this is not meant to be the end-all and be-all, but there are 4 key elements. One is strategic focus. Focus that means we work on important problems and where we think there's opportunity to make a difference. A second is idea generation. Game-changing ideas tend to come out of basic research because that pushes us to the edge of human knowledge. And universities have a particular role that they play in this regard. The third is translational pathways. Pathways to get ideas, discoveries, innovations into commercial and societal use. And the fourth is capital. And by capital, I mean financial, infrastructural, and especially, as you've heard from Norm, human capital. If we want to really build an innovation economy, we have to exploit what comes out of new discoveries in new arenas, whether we're talking nanotechnology, biotechnology, the big data revolution. But if we want to be able to do that, there has to be a new model for how companies can come together with safe harbors to move along a pathway, not unlike the kind of roadmap that lifted the semiconductor industry years ago. We especially need it in the form of shared infrastructure for startup companies. We need a financial underpinning that can get them through the so-called valley of death to move on to where they can scale, to where they can get major investments or major partnerships. But human capital in the end is the basis of innovation, And without it, we're nothing. And you saw on the video the great challenges that came out of the space program that got its start after the launch of the Sputnik satellite. But that generation is retiring, and those retirements will accelerate. We are not attracting sufficient young Americans into these fields, and we're not holding on to those from abroad who come here and receive education, including advanced degrees from our own university. Some of that relates to immigration issues and visas, but some of it rests with the fact that these young people have opportunities elsewhere, and we need to think about that. So in the end, we better think about how we educate our young people. They've come to us in a different way, from a different affect, and we need to be innovative in using technology and using new approaches for how we, in fact, do educate them. And that's why I'm delighted that Amir is with us today.
Shirley, at the beginning of your talk, you mentioned these key global challenges, such as global warming and climate change. Norm has pointed out that consumers here spend more on potato chips than the U.S. government devotes to energy R&D. Now, I like potato chips as much as the next person, although maybe after this obesity talk this morning, we shouldn't. But I'd just like to know how important you think that the energy sector and finding new paths to energy and kinds of things like changing our grid are to overall competitiveness.
Well, in order for us to have the kind of economy we've all enjoyed and wish to continue to enjoy, it requires that we take care of our environment. It requires that we have a certain kind of infrastructure. And I don't like to get into arguments about the kinds of arguments people get into about climate change. I have a point of view. But I'm also one who says, let's just be realistic about the challenges we face. And every time we have a major weather event, we see the interconnectivity of our transportation systems, our energy systems, our communication systems. And so there really is a need to update, to build resilience into our infrastructure. It also means that we've got to look at energy solutions where there's not one silver bullet, but where there is a diversity of source and a redundancy of supply. But when we do that, we have to understand the geopolitics of energy and how hard it is to, in fact, generate energy, whether we're talking about petroleum-based products, renewable sources. Many people don't appreciate the kind of infrastructure it really takes and the kind of innovation it takes to do all of these things in as environmentally benign a way as possible. And I talked about linkages to climate and to resource allocation. When we look at renewable sources of energy, many of the technologies actually depend upon materials that are as hard to source as primary energy sources themselves. And they too get linked to geopolitics. So science and engineering have a role to play, whether it has to do with substitution, looking at new types of materials, or looking at how we use what we have in a better way. These are where great opportunities exist.
So Susan, now to you, and I have to say, it was your op-ed column in the New York Times that actually gave rise to this particular panel when you talked about the relationship between innovation and manufacturing. So.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here. I have to start with a disclaimer. Those lovely things that were said about me in the introduction are actually history. I'm now president emerita of MIT. I stepped down in July, no longer president. And the second thing is, when I heard that Norm and Shirley were speaking before me, I figured the most efficient thing for me to say is, yeah, I agree, all that. So I'll just use a few minutes to kind of drill down on a couple of things that each of them called out. I think first it's really important that we don't do all doom and gloom, because the good news is that the pioneering entrepreneurial spirit of America that has fueled our economic progress up to this point is still vibrant and strong. And perhaps I come from an unusual part of the country, sitting in the middle of the innovation hub at Kendall Square, but young people come to the campuses in Boston with the same kind of desire to really make a difference and change the world as they have for generations. So that's the good news. I think the more troubling issue has to do with the way we think about ourselves and the way we think about the world. And Norm and Shirley both talked about it, and actually Jim Rogers spoke about it this morning when he talked about the cathedral view. One of the things that has infected the nation, and I think is one of the greatest dangers to us, is short-termism. The idea that the federal government would support the kind of research, the purposes to which we cannot know, is absolutely essential for continuing an innovation economy. And Shirley and Norm both referred to this, but I cannot sufficiently express the importance. If you go back and look at every one of the gizmos that we love today and go back to find their roots, they all came out of federally sponsored research decades ago when people were just muddling around trying to figure out just how some cool thing happened or just to understand some part of the physical or the biologic universe. So that's absolutely essential. Talent is critical. Everyone will talk about K through 12 education. It is enormously important to continue our nation's vitality that we get that right, that we improve it so that every kid has the opportunity to deliver to the nation and the world everything that his or her potential would allow. There's another piece, again, that both Norm and Shirley spoke about that is one of our most powerful assets and has been, frankly, since the founding of this country, and is immigrants. So people from around the world who want to come to the United States and benefit from all of our fascinating culture and human resources, this is an asset that we are in danger, I would say, of losing if we don't figure out immigration policies darn fast, because there are a lot of interesting places in the world now to be on the frontier of the innovation economy. You don't have to do it in America anymore. So I think those are absolutely critical. The third area is this problem of investments. And all the things we're talking about today have to do with whether you're investing for the quarter or whether you're investing for the next, quarter century and beyond. I had the privilege of serving as co-chair on the President's Advanced Manufacturing Partnership with Andrew Liverist from Dow. And we listened around the country. We talked to people in government and industry and the academy. And there were several things that came out of this study. The first is the absolute essential that in the United States, we cannot give up making things, making stuff, making widgets. It's enormously important, obviously, for jobs and the economic productivity of those kinds of businesses. But one of the things I think many people don't appreciate is how critical the making of stuff is to the cycle of innovation. And I think, from where I sit, there are a lot of great startups and probably not as much funding as we'd like for getting ideas from the lab into the pilot phase. But what we've learned, both from the Advanced Manufacturing Partnership and now from a study that's soon to come out of MIT called Production in the Innovation Economy, there's another valley of death. Shirley talked about the valley of death when you go from a fabulous and interesting idea in your laboratory and you try to figure out how it's going to become a product that we'll all want to buy. That's one of the valleys of death, but there's actually a much more severe valley of death right now in the United States, and it's the scale-up phase. So you've got some pilot thing, and you want to figure out how to make thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of them, and you want to drive down the cost. This is a piece of the innovation pipeline that requires a tremendous amount of iteration, a tremendous amount of innovation. And right now, we don't really have policies that are aligned so that capital-intensive industries, long-cycle industries, can actually get a product from its first idea onto the shelves or into the supply chain. That period takes 10 or 15 years, and there just isn't the kind of funding and consequently not the kind of infrastructure support of many kinds that we need to support that kind of effort. If I can think about one thing that the United States can't afford to give up besides these immigrants who have fueled the intelligence of the innovation economy, it certainly is this ability to make things here in the United States.
Hold on, can I just make a quick follow-on? In fact, PCAST, and I'm a member of PCAST, the President's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology, did an advanced manufacturing report that led to this advanced manufacturing partnership. And linked to what Susan said is the fact that what we found was that the R&D follows where things are made. And with that then come this innovation cycle that Susan spoke of. And so I just don't want us to kind of lose sight of that. And
so if we offshore the production,
that's right.
We also are offshoring ideas, the R&D ultimately. Right. So I just want to, make a final statement, and I guess I'm allowed to say politically undecorous things now because I'm no longer president. I have spoken in the past about a big deficit in America. It's an ambition deficit. And I think as a nation, one of the things we absolutely have to figure out is who are our heroes? What kind of work do we reward? What kind of a nation do we want to be? How do we want to play in the world? And I think the answer, in my mind, to all those questions requires kind of a rethinking about where our ambitions lie. And at MIT, where 85% of the undergraduates major in science or engineering, I could sit there and feel like everything is cozy. Around the nation, I think that number is about 15% of undergraduate degrees. Part of the problem with scale-up in the United States, there aren't the engineers and scientists to support the industries that we need. So, as a nation, I think we really have to think hard and really work hard on putting at the front of our parade the kind of people and ideas that can really lead the nation's continued progress.
So let me just ask you one question. I think what all of you have been expressing so far is a sense of urgency. Do you think that our political leadership, Congress, the administration, the cabinet, the governors, the people who can really do something about this, do you think that they understand how urgent this problem is and the way in which it's intimately linked to standard of living now and in the future?
I would say the following, and I can talk from the point of view of PCAST. I would say yes, the administration does understand that. I'm not a spokesperson for the administration, but based on the discussions that we have and the focus that we have, that is absolutely the case. I think what may have been lost sight of is the kind of three-way partnership that has undergirded progress for so many years. That partnership involved business, academia, and government, with each sector playing its role in an effective and cooperative way. And that's kind of frayed in more recent times. And so I think that has created some vulnerabilities, but I would much rather hear from Norm on some of those thoughts.
Well, Paula, surely, I would say that those of the government that I deal with, both in the White House and the Congress, and both parties, sense the importance of the issue, but not the urgency to the extent that's needed. 10 years ago, I wouldn't have said they understood the importance. I don't think there was an association between jobs for all people and the work that's done by scientists, for example. But today, they passed the America Competes Act some years ago and then barely funded it. If they sensed urgency, they would do that. On their behalf, they have so many problems on their plate that are short-term. It's tough to deal with long-term problems, but we have to find a way to do that.
And I would simply say that in the people I've talked with in Washington, I think there's an understanding of the problem. I don't want to be hopelessly pessimistic, but what we have witnessed over the last year plus in terms of coming up with a solution to our budget mess suggests that there isn't a sense of urgency nor a commitment to actually getting the thing done. So I'm very concerned about the ability to take action through our government right now, and I've had fabulous conversations with the administration, with Republicans, with Democrats, but as a nation, I think we are showing very little leadership to the nations around the world that are putting together new kinds of governments. Who would model the United States government anymore when we can't get the job done in terms of something very basic, which is coming up with a budget proposal that everyone won't love, but everyone can live with?
Amir, we'll go to you now. Each of these three speakers has spoken about the need for an educated workforce to fill the jobs that go on and how important they are. You are on the front lines, day in and day out, you have the fate and future of kids in your hands by teaching them. So can you give us an idea of what you do and how you've managed to introduce innovation in a public school in Santa Barbara, California?
So yeah, so I will do that, but I'd like to start out with what I think is important to understand is that we need innovative people in our economy. We need to have our students be trained to be innovative and creative, and if we don't do that, that is the biggest risk. And what I want everybody to understand right now is you hear things like about No Child Left Behind and all of these things that we've put in place to hopefully help that. And what those things have done is they've actually hampered this whole effort. What we've done is we've created metrics for evaluating students, and these metrics that we're using are evaluating outcomes that are not actually the outcomes that we need for our whole country to be successful. So we got standardized tests, people bubbling in answers, and kids do not know how to think creatively anymore. They're looking for a singular answer, and they're looking for immediate feedback on whether the answer is right. I teach some really bright students. I'm going to give you a little anecdote, which I hope will help illustrate this. So, we have a facility that we just built. It's 12,000 square feet, and it's not that large. I mean, you know, I could walk on the other side of this auditorium, and we're working on a robotics project. There's about 5 different rooms, and we're trying to manage a very complicated project. It involves a lot of communication between students. And I talked to a student the other day. I said, you know, do you know where this student is? We got to solve this problem. And she said, well, I called the student, and they didn't pick up. And I looked at the student, I said, well, you got legs, right? Meaning she could walk through the building. The student was in the building, but she called and she got the boxed answer, and the answer was that didn't work, and that was the end of the process for trying to solve the problem. Now you might say, well, that's these kids these days, the technology. Similar situation, I see a kid. I've been looking all over for this other student. I don't know where to find him. You have a cell phone, right? So again, they're not thinking creatively, they're not thinking in an innovative way. So what I've tried to do is really try to create an educational experience where students are engaged in their learning, where it's not in abstraction, they're not learning content, a mile wide and an inch deep, where we're really talking about focusing on core content areas in great depth so they can really understand the world around them and understand what they're studying. Kids these days are extremely demoralized, and I think it's they're demoralized because they see that they're in a world where information is free and information is everywhere, and then they're being forced to sit in a room and listen to one person tell them a bunch of facts hour after hour after hour in the classroom. And when they can get that same information online, readily available, in a way that maybe is more palatable, in a way that they can understand it better, in a way where they can pause it and learn at their own pace, they really are questioning why they're at school, more and more than we've ever seen. And I think that schools need to transform so that students don't ask the question, why am I here anymore? And that schools actually say, we're going to provide students with experiences that they cannot get on their own, that they cannot get from independent learning. So as an example, I brought my prop, so just to give you a sense of what we're doing. And we've created project-based learning where everything is project first. And what we've done is we're doing science and engineering, but we're tying it to other disciplines. So we tie our science and engineering projects into art, and a lot of the projects that they do, the student projects, are, even though we do robotics, we do some really amazing, complicated things, a lot of our projects, like I said, are couched in an artistic design. So this right here is an art project. And when we present to the students, these are 14-year-olds, we say, you know, we're going to give you this project, and you're going to learn a whole lot while you do it. We don't teach them a bunch of content and say, when you're done with college, you'll get to apply it someday in the future. So this thing maybe looks, you know, kind of simple at first glance, but let's kind of go through this and just get a sense of what learning and education can look like. So it's a programmable light sculpture. They design the entire artistic aesthetics of the light sculpture, the colors, the programming. Inside is a circuit board. They learn all the physics related to electricity that you would learn in a traditional physics class. They learn how to solder, how to fabricate, a complete circuit board. There's an Arduino computer, which is an open source computer platform for programming, and they learn how to program the entire sculpture. They fabricate every single one of these pieces in a manufacturing facility that we have. And and they're able to enhance their artistic vision because they're using solid modeling software, and after they artistically develop the project, they're able to actually make it come to life in 3D on the computer first, so that they can actually determine whether or not they actually like the project, and then they have the opportunity to iterate. And that's one of the things that we don't really give students the opportunity to do, which is to realize that you aren't ever really done, that you can always iterate and you can always make things better. And then there's some subtleties in here, which, you know, I just try to tell people how much you can integrate the curriculum. This whole sculpture is actually mapped out in polar coordinates, but the machine that they make it on is Cartesian. So we're actually able to teach them vectors using the machine, and they become the vector basically when they're moving the X component and the Y component of the machinery. They're able to plot out and have a real world experience attaching, you know, bringing in math and everything else. So the final thing is that it shows them that subjects are not compartmentalized. A typical school day is, you know, you're going English, math, foreign language, science. It makes it seem like the world is about all these different subjects. And I would say that the universities need to start to reflect on even the majors they have, and we need to reflect as a society on what is our goal for education. I mean, does getting a major in a subject make any sense anymore? I mean, should we be looking more broadly and thinking, how can we combine subjects together and provide people with integrated experiences where you get degrees? Like a degree in engineering, I think everyone knows that's a degree toward a career, but how many degrees line up with a career, and how many students are getting a degree without the context of where that's actually going to take them in terms of a career? So what I would say is we need to really look at education. We need to transform it. It doesn't need to be reformed. It needs to be transformed, and it needs to be such that students can continually feel that everything they're doing is relevant, that when they look around the world, they see that what they're doing makes sense, and I think this will be better for all students.
So I'd like to ask you just a bit about how you got to that point. You were a teacher of AP Physics.
Yes.
So what was your experience there, and how has it resulted in where you are now?
So I've talked to you about this. So basically, when I became a teacher, I left engineering thinking I was going to bring in all these hands-on, real-world experiences. And what ended up happening is that education, the way we do it, is so entrenched in all of our own educational DNA that we don't really know how to step out of it. We talked about that with college professors. Also, we had talked about this as a panel together backstage about how it's hard for people to change the way they teach. So I came into teaching, I had these ideas, but then my students were doing really, really well on standardized tests. And I would get the pat on the back, you know, this good job. And then I'd start that reinforce, well, I must be doing something right. Second year, more students got a 5, which is the best score on the AP test, than all the students combined in the 40-year history of our school on AP Physics. I was feeling pretty good about myself. I was thinking, wow, look at this transformation. And 3 or 4 years into the development of my program, I introduced what's called FIRST Robotics. It's a robotics competition. And I had those same AP Physics students then continue on in their senior year with me in robotics. And I realized that even though because I'd never done a longitudinal kind of study with these kids. They got their 5 in AP Physics and they moved on. And then I had these students their senior year, and they could not relate the physics in any way to the real world application of robotics that we were doing. And it was so shocking to me, and I felt completely humbled in the sense like, wow, I am not actually doing a good job at teaching physics. And, but I was struck by the fact that the world outside was rewarding me and patting me on the back and saying, you are in fact doing a great job. So that led me to this whole realization that what we really need to be doing is going into depth on subjects and having students spend a lot of time on a much narrower section of the topics than really just constantly inundating them with new material, test on Friday, move on. And that's really what our educational system looks like. It's really just you do some content and everybody has this idea, okay, well, I'm done with that, the next step. And I think that education, we should be teaching people that learning is a lifelong learning is what you should be striving for. And you know, it's a continuum. You should always want to be learning. And then I'd say the last thing that was really powerful was that when we did the FIRST Robotics, and even when we do this project, my background's in mechanical engineering, I actually don't know how to program this, okay? So the thing that's powerful is working with students and letting them know, being vulnerable enough to say, I don't know all the answers, and that's okay. And we're all here, and we're all learning together. And when they see that, they don't think that learning is like this finite commodity. They realize that everybody is around them is learning constantly, and they see me wanting to learn more, and they themselves in turn want to learn more, and so it just builds that environment, you know, that you really want, where people are really excited about the process of learning.
Well, you know, I am so excited about what you said for two reasons. You know, I talked about the big data-driven revolution. And here's the thing. In many ways, the internet is the new library, right? So you talked about students maybe kind of being bored about being lectured to about things they can get off of the web. But there's a bit of a caveat, because not everything on the web is particularly valid, correct, etc., right? So one of the beauties of the approach you're talking about is that it forces the issue of the validation or not of what students learn from the web by using the information they garner. And to have students be able to do that is one of the best things I think we can teach them in terms of lifelong learning. In addition, you know, it gets the students away from just them and the screen, right? Because it is the students with each other and with you. And so this idea of doing things in depth where there is a world of data and information out there, which they can access, but you've got to be able to teach them how to use it, how to think, etc. So the beauty of what Amir has done, and I've just gotten to know him, that's why I call him my new friend, is that he has essentially learned how to scale, or as Susan says, curricularize the FIRST robotics approach, but with real depth and content. Further, I'm a big believer that the best artists are really geometers, you know, visual artists. And so what you said about them learning artistic skills de facto by doing geometry, I think is incredibly exciting, and it raises an idea that I think we need to think more about, which has to do with bringing the disciplines back together again instead of having them in the silos we've had them in the past.
Paul, I have to ask a question that keeps coming up on my mind as I listen to Amir. How many 8th grade math and science teachers in America today do you think could do what Amir is doing? And to share a personal story, I took early retirement from Lockheed Martin because I'd always wanted to teach. And I have a master's degree in aerospace engineering, which incidentally makes me a rocket scientist. But I came to the sad discovery that I'm not qualified to teach 8th grade algebra in any school, public school in my state. And fortunately, in my case, the faculty at Princeton heard that I was unemployed and offered me a position on the faculty teaching engineers at Princeton, but I can't teach 8th graders at any school in my state. And that's not unique. That's a problem we've got to solve if we're going to have people like Amir in the job he's in.
I think also, So Amir describes his experience with AP physics students. This is la creme de la creme. And one of the things that I learned in the context of the Advanced Manufacturing Partnership and beyond is the other 95%, or let's talk about the lower 50% of kids in American schools who are just getting left behind. And what we have lost across this nation is a community college system, a technical education system that can support the industries that we want to have grow in this nation. Some companies have, kind of done it on their own. There's all this ad hoc filling in these gaps where, they have partnered with local community college to develop a curriculum for students so they end up, when they graduate from that community college, having the skills that are necessary to be employed in that manufacturing plant. But it is ad hoc. And I think a nation like the United States that pioneered educational achievement for all, a country where we started the land-grant colleges in the midst of the Civil War, we don't have now an educational infrastructure that allows the kids who aren't going to become, the physicists or the rocket scientists to actually play productive roles in our society. So I think, Amir, I love the idea. We've talked about it for everyone, but I particularly love the idea for the students who are getting most severely left behind.
So I promise we're going to get to more optimistic things in just a minute, but I have to ask this question. There was a fairly shocking article about a year ago in the New York Times which related the story of how President Obama was at a Silicon Valley dinner with Steve Jobs, and he asked Steve Jobs what it would take to make iPhones in the United States. And Steve Jobs, with his characteristic bluntness, said to the president, "Those jobs aren't coming back." Many reasons were given: the speed and flexibility of the Chinese, the factory system, and of course the quality of the foreign workers whose skills outpace our American counterparts. Is that the honest truth? Those jobs aren't coming back? Is there something that we can do about that to make sure we can overcome it?
Those jobs aren't coming back.
But other ones
But they're
will.
new jobs, exactly. So there are new jobs. And part of the kind of, the pressure about getting our educational system up to speed is that the kind of manufacturing jobs that were, dumb, dirty, and awful, but were relatively high paying that you could take and perform well at with less than a high school education, they are going to be very few and far between, unless we're talking about flipping hamburgers at McDonald's, but to cure childhood obesity, maybe those jobs are going to go away too. But the new kind of jobs, and when I think of about the manufacturing innovations that I know about coming along, it's true, they're jobs light, or certainly not jobs free, but jobs light, but the jobs that are going to be available, the value, high value jobs, are going to be jobs that are going to require an educational level that frankly, whether it's 50% or 75% of kids who are graduating from the standard high school in America can't take.
You mentioned Steve Jobs. He also told the president that the reason his firm employs 700,000 people abroad is he can't find 30,000 engineers in America.
Well, to get us going on a slightly positive note.
We'll have the audience crying in a minute.
I know. An interesting phenomenon, though, has to do with what's happening in the energy sector. With the, and I know it's somewhat controversial, but with what's happening with the price of energy, some of it having to do with the economy itself, some of it having to do with real conservation and more efficient appliances, vehicles, etc. And then, of course, some of it having to do with new unconventional sources of energy. And with that, in fact, there is a kind of creeping back of manufacturing. Mm-hmm. But in the end, what will drive the economy is advanced manufacturing. And that means new ways to manufacture what we make using newer technologies, but also manufacturing that's based on new types of technologies that come out of research and development. And so I actually am one who am hopeful, but I think the push is not going to come from the government side. It has to come from us.
So I can see that we are almost out of time. However, I am going to take 4 more minutes because I promised that we would end on a positive note. And I'd like each of you just to say, if you could wave a magic wand or use your powers of persuasion, which you all have very powerful and strong ones, and have 1 or 2 steps that we could take immediately to improve this situation and to make an investment in the future, what would it be?
Maybe we should start with him. He teaches us.
Okay.
I would say that what I would do is I would put control of education back into local hands immediately, and I would have faith. Thank you. I would have faith that the best teachers, when given the opportunity to think creatively, so it's really got, people say, how can anyone else do this? Amir, you've done this amazing stuff. The one thing that I have is tenacity, okay? And I'm willing to just go till the end to make something happen. But there are a lot of creative teachers out there that just have been beaten down so much by the system that they just have just succumbed to what it is that we're experiencing now. So I'm trying to make this positive. So what I would do is I would put education back in local hands, and I would trust that there are many. Don't read the papers about all these negative things you hear about teachers. There are many caring, wonderful, hardworking teachers who want to be innovative and who want to take their career back and have it be a creative, exciting environment. Their own creativity will then mirror and reflect back on the students and vice versa, an innovative spirit. The idea of having, what we've done is we've basically tried to bring up the bottom, and in the context what we've done is we've brought down the top and we just have mediocre education. And I think we just need to know that the bottom is the bottom. And you don't bring up the bottom by pushing down the top. You just don't do that. You bring up the bottom by enhancing the top and bringing everybody up to meet that. So that would be what I would do, and it's not that hard. We just have to repeal No Child Left Behind, and we have to let local school boards control the courses that the students take and let teachers, you know, loose, and I guarantee you, people like myself can go around and evangelize this whole thing, and we can basically change the world.
Other aspirations? Shirley?
I think we need to think about what it takes to attract and retain teachers like Amir. I'm a proponent of putting power into the hands of principals, and because they're the ones in the end who inspire support and people like you. I think we have to recognize that talent is everywhere and make a commitment to educate all of our children and to find talent in all of them, wherever that might be on the spectrum. And then I think we've got to help those who make the decisions to understand the urgency of supporting basic research in our research universities now and continuing that. Thank you.
Susan?
You know, I see young people who are just driven, and Amir sees them to figure out how they're going to help in the world. And as a nation, we need to help them. We need to kind of pave the avenues to march down. And I think, you know, I grew up under the shadow of Sputnik. It was a wonderful time to be interested in science and math, even as a girl. And we don't have a similar kind of national ambition, so I think we need to really think about, you know, what can we put out there for people to rally around. I had great hopes around energy, and frankly, I can talk about energy in a persuasive way, about the economy and about national security without even getting to climate change, although I have very, you know, strong views about how important getting our hands around climate change might be. So articulating a national ambition and somehow to be able to kind of, you know, change our clock from thinking about what's going to happen over the next 4 months to what's going to happen over the next 40 or 400 years, I think is absolutely essential for the nation, to have a long view in our ambitions.
Norm, we started with you, and you can have the final word.
I don't want everyone to leave here saying that Norm is a pessimist. So I would remind you that a pessimist is a person who wants to be an optimist but has knowledge of the facts. And I will be very brief with regard to the principal problem I see, which is our K-12 education system writ large. What we need to do is bring the free enterprise system to public education. The free enterprise system has made our country's economy great. It's worked in virtually every country in which it's tried. Our great universities, they're the finest in the world. Our great universities embrace the free enterprise system. So if we could bring that to the public K-12 schools, I think it would make all the difference in the world. What do I mean by the free enterprise system? One ingredient of it is that you pay great physics teachers more than good physics teachers, and you encourage poor physics teachers to find a new profession. And that...
I agree with that.
A few simple things like that, I think, would change the entire environment.
Well, it has been a delight to, I feel like we could go on for another hour, but I think they'll yank us off the stage with the rope. So thank you very much to this distinguished panel and to you for being such a good audience.